Innerfire podcast. We're glad everybody's with us today. We've got a special guest with us today, Dennis Parker. Dennis is a Nashville musician. He's been involved in country and bluegrass music around Nashville. He's played with some names you all will know, and we might talk about some of them as we go along the way. Dennis has also had some issues over the years with alcoholism that God has rescued him out of. And we want to talk about that story today. Currently, Dennis is playing with Ricky Skaggs and Kentucky Thunder, and it's on the road with them. If you've seen Ricky Skaggs lately, you've probably seen Dennis standing up there with him with his guitar, also doing background vocals. I personally have seen Dennis perform in church, and we'll get into all that later. But when I heard him perform, I said, really got to get to know Dennis. He's passionate about Christ. And so here we've got this opportunity now to sit down and talk. So Dennis, welcome to the Innerfire podcast.
Well, it's good to be here. Thanks for inviting me. This
Absolutely,
is awesome.
Absolutely. Well, we want to just get a little bit about your background, Dennis, and kind of lay some groundwork for how you wound up where you are today. And I know there's a big story there, but tell us, just start at the beginning, kind of a little bit about your childhood and were you involved in church in your childhood, and just a little bit of foundational stuff there.
Yep, my dad was from Winchester, Virginia. My mother was from Maryland, from Baltimore, and my dad was in the military. I was born in Fairbanks, Alaska. My dad was stationed there and retiring. He was retiring from the Army. He'd spent his 25 years in there. And my mother called me their retirement bonus. My father called me something else. He was not as enthused about, him starting his retirement with this new burden. But growing up, my mother and father were faith. They took me to church regularly. My dad loved bluegrass music. Absolutely. In fact, there's a large part of bluegrass that just, it drives me crazy. That's why I know God has a great sense of humor that I'm playing with Ricky Skaggs, Mr. Bluegrass, because I really, in a lot of ways, had a lot of disdain for bluegrass because I had been force-fed it. I woke up every morning to the Live at Carnegie Hall Flatt and Scruggs album. In fact, I know it's a great album, but if I ever see that album out anywhere, I buy it and I burn it. I don't want to hear it again. Not to say that there's not great value. And I know bluegrassers will probably, I'll be on a cross here soon from somebody. They'll nail me up to it. But that's how I grew up. My father loved. He played guitar. He was learning how to play the banjo, and that was the first start of me being intrigued by music. I would listen to my dad practice. He'd wake up at like 5 o'clock in the morning, which my mother had some talks with him. He had to adjust that. He ended up buying a Winnebago and practicing out in that, so he could practice before work because he was driving us crazy. But when I was little, my mother would take his banjo and he'd sit it on my lap, and she knew my mother was just a spiritually godly woman. And for some reason or another, she knew I was interested in it. And my father had bought me a cheap banjo that I didn't want to have anything to do with. My mother knew that. And when my dad would go to work, she would lay his banjo in my lap, which, the banjo's really heavy. And I started playing when I was around 5 or 6, just noodling around with it. My father found out I was interested in it, and he taught me how to play Cripple Creek at 6 years old. And I just took to it. It was something that made sense to me. My dad struggled. My dad just struggled how to play. But it was almost a riff early on, why is this 6-year-old grasping this? And I'm working like day and night and I can't get it.
It's kind of bad when your 6-year-old bypasses you on the instrument you're trying to
play. Man, and he took me to this banjo teacher that he was taking from, and I was too young. And the guy said, I don't teach kids. He said, I can't do it. And my dad told him, he says, look, I've taught him one song. Listen to him. If you still think that, I understand. But I went and played for the guy, and the guy said, we'll figure something out. And that was my first instance in learning how to play. And what's cool is my dad passed away a couple years ago. And since his passing, I thought I'd never see that banjo teacher again. But he's become a part of my life. And he tells me these old stories that I don't remember as a kid.
Right.
And he talks about, he said, man, I had to, he said, you couldn't hold the banjo. He said, I had to move all the furniture out. And he says, and I got a couple pillows. And we'd sit on the floor and we'd lay the banjo in between your legs on this pillow. And that's how you learned how to play. And my dad would take me to all these bluegrass contests and fiddle contests and stuff. And I started winning. There was no beginner banjo, nothing. I was entering in regular banjo contests, playing against adults and stuff. And I started winning contests when I was 7. So it was, this is stuff.
So God gifted you to play the banjo and the guitar.
And that's the thing, and I really try to tell people that going into, because music is such a thing of pride for people. And there's a lot of people that struggle with it. A lot of people just take to it. God has gifted us all in different ways. And for some reason, this is just something that makes sense. Put me in front of a car and break it down, and then have me in front of it and tell me to fix it. Son, you're out of luck. I can't do it. But I can teach you a G run all day. So, that was how I grew up. My mother was the unconditional love in our family. My dad was the military rule guy.
Right.
My gosh, you do it how he says, when he says it, and exactly how he said it. Don't veer away from it. Do exactly this, and we're going to get along just fine. So my dad ruled with a kind of iron fist. My mother was the one with the gentle touch. And there was a lot of coaching that my mother did to my mother. I used to hear the pillow talk,
I hear you.
Just kind of soften him up, and you'd see some results of that the next morning. But there's a lot of rules, and a lot of, you got to do it this way, and there's this one way. And I've found that to be a lot in bluegrass too. There's
so
one. Go ahead.
So so you grew up, you got started playing, started winning contests.
Yeah.
You were in church. Mom was a very godly lady. So when you hit about 18, or whenever you kind of started to get out from under the wing of your parents, what'd you do then? What happened as you started becoming an adult and kind of getting out on your own?
Well, I'd moved away from home when I was 18. I had dreams of. I didn't really know what I was doing. I'd moved off because there was a bluegrass group that I was playing with up in Fort Payne, Alabama, and I went there because they were having a little bit of success and playing on the Grand Ole Opry and stuff. So I went and did that. Eventually I got married. I was married, and I ended up, like, music just wasn't working out. It wasn't paying the bills. I was working in a sock mill up in Fort Payne, Alabama, and eventually, trying to build a life with a wife and stuff and that. But the trouble came when some opportunities came available to me. I veered away from church, after I moved away from home, pretty much. I was in church a little bit when I was married and stuff, but the first gig I ever got on the road was with Jeff and Sherry Easter. I played in gospel music for about a year and a half. And I'll just be honest with you, it's not something that you just hear all the time. And I don't want to be a naysayer, but I saw more stuff in gospel music that really turned me off against God. People claiming to be one thing and acting another, or I just saw a difference in faith.
So when you were in gospel music and you were seeing these things that didn't come together, and a lot of people see that, and that does turn a lot of people off about religion. Would you say you were saved at that point in time, or were you just religious?
I think I had been exposed, but I also think I was like disillusioned in my understanding what salvation really was. I came to a place of uh, being scared. There was a time when I was a kid that all I heard about was the rapture. You know, and what I really understood is I'm fixing to get left. You know,
Right.
I'm going to be
Right.
stuck here. My mama is going to be gone. I used to sit a pallet on the side of the bed, and I remember hearing these creaks and stuff. And this is after that prayer supposedly I said, "Oh, Jesus, come into my life." You know, that's the all save all kind of thing. But I was worried and scared to death the majority of my life, not really truly feeling secure. But I really never knew what I was signing up for.
Right.
You know, I said a prayer. I said a prayer because I didn't want to get left. But I really didn't understand what Jesus was all about, what he'd actually done. I understood he died for my sins, and I really didn't completely understand how sinful I was.
Right.
Yeah, it was just so I had a warped version of what I thought I was saved. So yes, I thought I was saved.
Right. Right. Well, and I can identify with that, Dennis, because I mean, when I was a kid, I mean, you heard a lot more preaching on hell and the rapture than you do
Hal
now.
Lindsey, the great, it's like this. I was waiting for this mushroom cloud thing to be bombed,
Exactly.
scared to death.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you as a kid, I laid in bed often during a period in my life thinking, I wonder if the rapture has happened and I've been left here by myself. I had those same thoughts, so I can identify with that.
I
And
had this pallet by the bed, and I remember hearing creaks and stuff, or stuff that I thought had happened. And I literally, as a kid, I would grab a hold of my mother, and I had this warped idea that if she was going to go and I held tight enough,
yeah,
Jesus would take me with her. I had some really unbelievably, but it was just completely out of fear.
well, when you're a kid, you just don't necessarily understand that. So, so probably when you were playing gospel music, maybe didn't completely understand salvation, thought you were saved, had said a prayer, but obviously at that point in time, based on what you're saying, you didn't have the passion for Christ that you have now.
And part of this, I have to make a disclaimer. I played with Jeff and Sherry, and I told you that. You might get the impression that I'm talking against Jeff. Jeff and Sherry are probably two of the sweetest, most golden people on earth. It wasn't them that I'm referring to. I'm referring to, we were out with lots of
Oh
groups
yeah, oh
at
yeah,
that time. There was and Southern Gospel was pretty big market at the time that I was out in the early 90s and stuff. And so I just saw a lot of inner workings that bothered me, a lot of selling of Jesus. If you could have this spiritual experience and people could move your heartstrings, and they'd sell more Jesus magnets and more t-shirts and more product. And it was all about a spiritual experience, and everybody was competing against each other. Really wasn't the gospel. And so that just became really disenchanting to me, to the point that I had a project that I did back in those days. It was a project called The Missing Piece. It was a horrible experience. Everything about it, putting it together, was a horrible experience. I mean, I had to sing all the parts. I had 2 days to do it, 20 songs. It was miserable. In fact, periodically I see people say, "Hey, I got this, boy, one of my favorite albums." Like, man, I wish that would go somewhere. I wish nobody had it. But that, right when I'd done that is when I just decided I really just don't want to be out here. I don't want to be a part of this. I don't want to be in this dog and pony show of peddling something. And this was really, I really understand it now. I didn't want to peddle something that I didn't know anything about.
right.
God really did not have a calling on my life. I didn't know that I'd be talking about something that I had no relationship with.
Right.
So yeah, I had no business being out there. So that was really the true intent. But I like to, in some way, insert the the whole, I got disenchanted with God.
Yeah.
Uh,
So you got disenchanted, right? And so you said, hey, I'm not gonna live a life maybe that's hypocritical or whatever you were thinking of, disillusioned. So you got some other opportunities to play some other music. What
I
happened
went
there?
back. I went back home. Put all my instruments on the bed, and I went back to work in the sock mill.
Hmm.
And I stayed there for a little bit. I moved on to a steel fabrication plant, which, thank God, something happened to get me out of that, because I was not qualified at that either. I worked a drill press there, and of all things, I was hanging insulation. I was building a house. I was hanging insulation in my house, and my wife came in and she said, some guy named Ricky Skaggs is on the phone. She didn't know who Ricky Skaggs was,
All
And
right.
I'm like, yeah, I'm sure it is. And she said, Dennis, it's, just take the phone. I think I argued with her, and I finally took. And when I heard his voice, I knew it was him. And basically, some of the people that I'd met in gospel music had moved on. Mark Fain was one of them. He played with Gold City, and he
Mm-hmm.
started working with Ricky. And when Brian Sutton was moving to lead guitar, because Keith Sewell was leaving, and they had a utility position open and singer. They needed a singer, and he says, you've come in high recommendation. He says, we're going to be in Georgia. Would you come and play for me? I'd love to see if you'd like to come work with us. And so I did. I took all my instruments and I played for him, and I got the gig, and I traveled in his country band for, about a year and a half, until he went, we did the Bluegrass Rules record. He was transitioning from country back into bluegrass.
Mm-hmm.
And I was part of that. Yeah. So
Okay, so that got you back into music when Ricky
got back in.
Skaggs
Yeah.
called. I mean, there's a lot of people in the music industry would like to get a call like that.
Yeah. I really didn't. I didn't pan for it. I didn't work for it. I didn't ask for it. I think God has a plan for your life.
Sure.
And sometimes, the things that work out, or that you don't work for, or the things that God he brings your way. I think sometimes we can fiddle around with things and really insert ourselves into something where we really have no business being there, which I did a lot of that too.
Well, you can look back on your life oftentimes and see along the way where God did something that you couldn't do. Right. I mean, I look back on my life and I
Absolutely.
see plenty of places like that where I say, I wish I had been smart enough to have done that on my own, but I wasn't.
Yeah.
But God put me in the right place or with the right person or gave me the right opportunity. All right, so kind of keeping the story moving, you were with Ricky Skaggs for about a year and a half or so, and he went back into bluegrass, and maybe you didn't want to go that direction.
That
Right?
was that was part of it. I felt like, I could be used somewhere else, and I could have my my horn tooted a little louder somewhere else, because I was playing arch top there and just singing a little bit. It wasn't that I I just felt like I was I just felt like everybody was way more talented than I was, and I was absorbed by that. So I got an opportunity to play. I went and auditioned for Joe Diffie, and I got that gig, which I stayed with. At the time that I started working with Joe. Joe wasn't working much, and when he wasn't working, Ricky was working. So I actually, for about another 6 months, I played with Ricky while he was looking for somebody, and played with Joe at the same time. So, but that was my real jump into, like, because Ricky's a man of faith, and there's a little hedge of protection around the Ricky camp. He kind of protects you from yourself. There's rules.
Right.
He has kind of godly set of rules that are there, and I didn't really like that either. Just to be quite honest.
Right.
Because when Ricky left, the cork got extinguished from the bottle, and it was all on. But it was my chance of freedom, like making my own choices, doing what I wanted to do, go in an area, and also feel like I was able to use more of what I had. I played multiple instruments. I wanted to do that. I just wanted more opportunity. I just wanted more credit.
Sure. Well, and that, everything you're saying is a natural tendency of man, right?
Absolutely.
We want the credit, we want more, we want a bigger platform, and we can justify it oftentimes by saying things like, hey, I go over here, I can play all my multiple instruments, those kind of things. So you
I can
did
do it.
that.
Why shouldn't I get it?
Yeah.
Why shouldn't I be able to do it? I have the ability to do it. It's now I can just go do it. And so I stayed there for 6 years, 6, 7 years. I moved different places. I went with Tracy Lawrence. We were on a package deal with Tracy Lawrence and Mark Chestnut. We had a combined band for a couple years, and we played this thing called the Rock and Roadhouse Tour. And my life, I was working a lot. I mean, we were working a lot, away from home a lot. My marriage was really kind of on the rocks, and part of it is I have this need, and I still find myself finding a need to never disappoint anybody, and always trying to. Basically, what I ended up doing is like putting band-aids on things.
Right.
Never really solve anything. Never really communicate. And I had a double life. I had one way at home, and I had one way out on the road, and I was okay with that.
Well, see, and that's an important point to me, Dennis, because one of the things that we're really big on is integrating our faith, right? Which means you don't live two lives, right? The life you live at home is the same person you get at home. It's the same person you get at work. It's the same person you get when you're out doing a hobby with the guys or whatever. And I see just in my talking with people, even the short length of time we've been doing this podcast, is that's when people get into trouble, right? It should be a flag for people. Hey, when you suddenly find yourself living two different lives, that should be a flag that there might be trouble coming, right? So anyway,
well, it didn't seem like it. I was protecting what I had at home.
Yeah.
But then when I got away from home, I was indulging in what I felt like I deserved.
Right.
We had there's this thing called the 500-mile rule. Whatever happens 500 miles away from home, it's almost like the whole Vegas thing. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. And there's this rule of conduct a lot of times out on the road that, the family, it just takes a back seat to everything.
Sure.
And I really got into that lifestyle. And plus in the gigs hour, you had access to everything. I mean, you had things on the rider that Ricky Skaggs don't have on the rider. You have your bottles of Patron, and you have your bottles of Wild Turkey, and you got your bottles of Crown, and you got the endless supply of beer and pills and whatever anybody else brings out there. Plus, you got the women on the sides and the admirers and the people that are always stroking your ego and telling you how great you are and how wonderful you are and how blessed you are and how unbelievable you are. God, I wish I was you. God, man, how'd you get here?
Right.
How'd I get here? Oh yeah, it's great. I'm
awesome. That's
so great.
That is a dangerous place to be, isn't it?
It's a hamster wheel. It's a wheel that you get on, and you're feeding the monkey night and day, and you're never ever full.
Now, it's interesting that you would say that. And here's what, to me, it's just kind of what you were just relaying with people saying, oh, I wish I were you, and those kind of things. For somebody who's never been on the road, touring with a nationally known artist and on stage in front of thousands of people and screaming fans and all that kind of stuff, it seems like the ideal situation, right? Everybody wants to be there, but I mean, what would you say to somebody who has that view and thinks, oh, if I could just get there, I will have arrived?
I'd say be careful. I'd say, without God in your life, without his calling on your life to be out there, you will die a cruel death.
Mm.
You'll end up being on the wayside, just begging for bread.
Mm.
It took me in a direction, and I got warned, even by people in the church
Mm.
about and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with playing secular music.
Right.
I'm not, but I tell you, I would be careful as a person of faith going out into the secular field, because you will have a lot of people dressed up in sheep's clothing
Mm.
that are just a nut. They're just wolves disguised, and they will give you everything that you ever thought you wanted. I don't need everything I need. I want it. I've had it. I've indulged in it. I'm like the Solomon thing. I've had it. It was there, and I woke up one day and I was empty.
Mm.
And because
Mm.
I mean, there's just no there's
So,
just no there's no payoff.
so how did you go, Dennis, from kind of, you might say, kind of on top of the world from a musician standpoint, playing with big names on the road, kind of everything at your fingertips, to being to the point where you just said you woke up? I mean, tell us how you got from one spot to the other.
Well, one of my biggest, and I don't tell this very often, but my, probably one of my darkest times is also become a moment of a little bit of pride. I got fired from Tracy Lawrence for drinking too much.
Mm.
Now, if anybody knows about the guys out in Tracy Lawrence, I mean, at that day, it was an alcoholic's dream. I mean, you were encouraged to drink, and
Mm.
drink heavily. If you weren't drinking, you were asked why. You know, and and
Really?
I had tipped the scale so far that I actually got fired for doing what I was told I was supposed to be doing.
Mm.
And that, my friend, is a lot of drinking. That that was and that is a point that I didn't realize it at the time, but that was the point that God was taking me on path to show me who I really was.
Mm. Mm.
And the worst day became the best day of my life.
Mm.
I thought I was okay, and I thought I could handle it, and I thought everything was all right. And then the bottom fell out.
Mm.
Then I was stuck with, how am I gonna pay my bills? You know, and
Mhm.
even that, my friend, that wasn't the end. I still managed and controlled my drinking and my life, just with less income and without the notoriety of playing with a major artist.
Right.
When I started, you know, just trying to get by, and
Right.
the getting by just kept getting worse.
Mm.
And
So
it kept.
by so at this time, when that started, Dennis, I mean, that's a day of reckoning when you realize that. But at this time, was your marriage still intact then, or had that already fallen apart?
I
Or
had I had divorced, yeah, you know, yeah, I had divorced, and I was in massive debt. You know, um, I had a little boy that had just been born, and no longer a part of my life. You know, and dark days. I mean, serious, serious dark days. And but it was still, was normal because I was in control, and I thought I could get past it. But then it just kept getting worse and worse, and the gigs got less and less. And then the next thing you know, I'm destitute. Now I'm relying on people.
mm.
You know, I'm relying on, on my mother and my father and the graciousness of my parents until that was no more, until my father had enough. He's not going to enable me.
Right.
And then I had girlfriends that enabled me for a long, long time. And it was a life of playing the victim. I have been victimized. It is not my fault. I didn't do any of this. This has been done to me. Everybody else was wrong. I got fired. I got thrown by the side. I'm useless. I'm useless because they say they don't give me a chance anymore. I've been wronged.
Right.
Never facing the consequences or facing the actual truth. The truth made me mad.
Right.
The truth ticked me off. I don't want to hear the truth. You're going to sit around and tell me I've got a drinking problem? I ain't got a drinking problem. You got a problem judging me. Don't you judge me. I got this under control. But everything in my life was in disarray. It was so clear. It was so clear to everybody else. Why was it not clear to me? Unbelievable how ridiculous it was.
Well,
Until I exhausted everything. I exhausted girlfriends. I exhausted my last girlfriend. I exhausted the last couch I could sit on. I exhausted this, and I ended up homeless. Nowhere to go.
Well, and that before you continue your story, let me just point out a few things there, because I can see, even though this is in your past, right? I can still see the pain in your eyes and in your face when you talk about it and have to go back there and relive it. And to me, it just reminds me of that we have an enemy called Satan, and he puts out all these big shiny things for us to chase, and he never tells us that this is where his ultimate goal for us to be is right where you wound up, right? In so much pain, destitute. And the other thing, for anybody that's listening, anybody that hears this, I just hope they will hear that. If the enemy is hanging some bright shiny object out there, back to what you were saying earlier, make sure you know where you're going and what you're doing and who you got around you, because that shiny object could be leading you right to where you wound up. And the other thing is, you just said, I had people telling me, hey, you got a drinking problem and all this, but you couldn't hear them. It brings to me we all need somebody in our life that we trust, that we give permission to reel us back in, right?
It'd be nice if you'd listen to somebody, but I wasn't listening to nobody.
Right.
I wouldn't. I was disenchanted with church. I had gone into churches periodically and felt them to be hypocritical. I was the guy that felt this is just a dog and pony show. All this is. They just selling something. I'd had such a bad experience in gospel music and seeing people in their faith and living double lives and stuff. I didn't want to have anything to do with it. Go into that. You can have that, and then I was just completely down out. I didn't have any money. I had nothing. I was pawning instruments, for goodness sake. I didn't, I was my craft. I couldn't do what God had gifted me to do anymore, because I was just in that state. I could not stop drinking. I could stop for a few days, but then I got to the point of, why am I stopping? I got no reason to stop. I need to keep going. I've got no hope. I was disillusioned into believing that I didn't matter anymore, that God didn't exist. And if he did, he sure enough didn't care about me. And that everything that was good in my life, I'd already done. And it was behind me. And there was no way of ever returning back to any kind of fulfilling life.
Right.
Nothing. There was nothing. That was the only thing that I could see. So why in the world wouldn't you drink?
Yeah.
If
Well,
if
and
that's
you know,
what
the
you
Bible,
believe,
the Bible tells us without a vision, people perish. And when you get to that point where you think all the good stuff behind me, there's nothing out in front of me worth living for. I mean, a man without hope that's a bad situation to be in.
yep.
So
Well,
how in the world did you get out of this? Did it
well,
get worse
I
yet?
mean, what I
How did you
I
get out?
was I was living with this girl in New Market, and one day I was going down Winchester Road, and I saw this sign that they had live music on Fridays, and I went and talked to this guy. His name was Keith at Flint River Coffee House. It's still there.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I play music. I said, is there any way I can play here on Friday nights? And he hired me after I auditioned for him. He hired me, and every week on Fridays I would play, and that was the only money that I had coming in.
Mm-hmm.
And in the process of me playing there, he was actually he owned this coffee house, but he was a minister of music out of a place in Tony, Alabama, and he was having bluegrass day out at his church. And he said, "Will you come and play banjo and fiddle for us on Sunday morning?" And I'm like, I told him, I said, "Man, I don't own a fiddle, and I don't own a banjo." He said, "Well, if I can find one, will you play it?" And I said, "Sure." So he called this friend of his named Cindy Musselwhite.
Mm-hmm.
And he called her up and said, "Hey, I got this guy. He comes, he plays there every Friday. He says he'll come to my church and play, but he used to play with. He said he used to play with Ricky Skaggs. He says, but uh, he says he'll play a banjo, but he doesn't own a banjo. He says he'll play fiddle, but he doesn't own one of them." And Cindy said, "He plays them, but he don't own them." And she said, "I'm calling this guy's bluff. I want to watch this guy fail."
Right.
So she said, "I got a banjo, I got a fiddle, I'll bring it." And she went to this church, and I played, and she said she was flabbergasted,
Mm-hmm.
and she said she had a bluegrass band, and I started playing with her.
Mm.
Because she had this guitar player that wasn't he was an engineer, and he couldn't make these gigs that she had, and I spent many hours with this woman in a car telling her how God didn't exist, and
Mm.
her telling me how he did, and quoting this scripture what she believed. And I'm like, and I'm feeling like this is my opportunity to set this girl straight.
Right.
She started taking me to church at this little church. I had a backpack with a bottle of vodka in it, and I would sit on a pew week after week. And when the altar call came, I'd get out of the pew and I'd go to the bathroom and just drink just so I could stay steady. And these people knew exactly what I was doing, but they never stopped me from coming.
Mm.
And
They loved you. They loved you anyway.
that's a message for the church. I don't care how messed up somebody is, man. The sick need a doctor, and that church right there has the absolute cure.
Mm.
And don't you dare run people. Don't you dare run these sick people off, man. So anyway, little by little, I was being experienced, but I still didn't want to. I didn't want nothing to do with it. Didn't have anything to do. I was around it, and I was being taught it, and I was trying to, these words are being spoke to me, but I still didn't want to have anything to do with it. But I had a record. I haven't told you this, but I had quite the record. I had warrants for my arrest. I kept going to jail time and time again through my alcoholism. Bunch of DUIs. I got 5 DUIs, for goodness sake, through the years.
Mm.
And I had at this particular period that I'm talking about, I had 3 warrants for my arrest. I had 2 in Tennessee, and I had 1 right there in Huntsville, Alabama. because I had a DUI back in 2008 that had not been squared away.
Mm.
So, and I tell this story, and I functioned a lot of times in a blackout, and for some reason or another, this particular day, I was heading over to my friend Cindy's house, and I was in my father's car, and me and my father were at odds with each other. So I don't know how I got that truck, but I was pulling into a driveway, and another truck barreled right into me. And it was that point that I knew I was going back to jail. And I didn't know how long I was going to be gone, but that was an unbelievable day. And through the process of going back to jail, the only person that would talk to me was Cindy. Mm. And I would call her, and I wanted somebody on the pity party with me and feel sorry for me. And she never did. What she did was tell me, she said, Dennis, you're at the perfect place for you. Jail? You're at the perfect place for you, Dennis. You have no distractions. You don't have to worry about bills. You don't have to worry about warrants. You don't have to worry about nothing. You know, what you need to do is get a hold of a Bible, and you need to get in that thing, and you need to allow God to draw near to you. She told me at one time, she said, I know God has a calling on your life. I can see it. He said, and there was many times that she felt like walking away from me, and she felt a divine calling in her own life to stick and tell me the truth. She was the only one left, and the only one. She told me the truth. And I did. That's what I did. I started getting into a Bible. I found a Bible when I was in jail there, and through a series of events, I wanted to get out of my cell. I went to an AA meeting. They had 2 meetings a month. There wasn't a whole lot of time. And the first meeting I ever went to, I walked out of, and they got you in the shackles and stuff. And, right. You're walking down a hall, stand over to the left, and they open the door. And I look down at the door, and I look down the aisle there, and there's a guy that I haven't seen in 20-something years when I was a kid, used to go to church with. He was an alcoholic that had been delivered, knew Jesus. And I walked down that aisle in my volunteer orange, prison orange, and he hugs me, and I was really embarrassed. But it was through those series of events and through those meetings in AA that I realized what I was, and that I had a problem, and the only answer was a God of my understanding, and the only God of my understanding that I knew of and could grab a hold a little bit of. And it wasn't much, I'm just telling you that, but it was the faith of my youth. And it was this guy named Jesus that one day died on a cross for my sin. And I finally figured out what sin was. I had a mess that I had culminated. I had consequences for all this sin. I had charges. Even after I got out of jail, I faced charges in 2 other counties. So I had this mess of sin, and I finally realized what consequences of sin were, and I finally figured out what that meant to God. That I had a debt that I couldn't pay, and it made sense that Jesus was God, came to this earth, lived a sinless life, was pierced for my transgressions. And all I had to do was accept that. Wow. And I found that in an AA meeting. And I remember going back and getting on a phone, because I had a few minutes before lights were out, and I called Cindy. And I called her, and I told her, I said, you know what? I'm not going to drink anymore. and I'm sorry for how I've treated you.
Mm.
You know, you were the one that pointed me straight over to Christ, and I kept denying, and I kept ridiculing you, and I kept taking you over the coals over it, calling you an idiot and thinking you were stupid. But she just told me the truth,
Mm.
and she didn't believe me. Of course you wouldn't. Why
Right.
would you? But
So,
God had done a miracle that day, and it was a
right.
starting point of something that, of all things, I went from the day before feeling like I didn't matter and there was no hope and
Mm.
everything good was behind me, to the next day finding a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, and I could walk that way.
Right.
I could walk towards that light and I'd be all right.
Mm.
I felt it just as much as I know that God made little green apples.
Right.
It was unbelievable. It was this
So
change.
I got a question that's burning in my mind here.
Go ahead.
Where would you be, Dennis, without Cindy?
I'd be down south. I'd be in a prison somewhere down south,
Mm.
because there were consequences to all my, and there was things that she did that God had a part of that really showed me mercy. I
Mm.
was shown so much mercy when I was in jail this last time. I should have got a third DUI, which would have been about 10 years in jail.
Mm.
I wouldn't have been in a county jail. I would have been in prison.
Right. Right.
And if I'd have went to prison, I don't know that I would have ever come out of that.
Right. Right. So I think it's safe to say, because Cindy was obedient to God in what He showed her you
Yeah.
could be, that she was obedient, that she saved your life by being obedient, by not giving up on you,
There's
by
a
being persistent. And I mean, I haven't met Cindy. I'd like to meet Cindy sometime. I mean, she sounds like the kind of person that's a tremendous person. Uh,
yeah.
but she had to have a high level of faith in God that God could even rescue you. I mean, I'll be honest with you. There's a lot of people, when they see somebody that was in the state that you're in, they basically say he's gone too far. There's no there. Even though they're Christians and we believe God's a miracle worker, too many times we write people off and we just say there's no hope for him. He just needs to pay what he's made his bed. He needs to lie in it. He's chosen that path. They need to pay the consequences. Obviously, Cindy had some hope for you. So I think it's just a lesson to all of us.
I
Don't give up on people.
No, but don't enable.
Right.
Don't give up, but don't enable.
Tell
Uh,
them the truth.
the enabling is the constantly allowing you to continue to do the same things you're doing. Sometimes I've seen, even in the program that I'm in, with the guys that I really believe in, that teach these processes of not enabling, that they have to sometimes have these hard lessons that they have to pass on to their children that are in this addiction. They have to really practice what they preach, and
Right.
that is tough. I talk with a lot of people and a lot of mothers that I cannot give up on my son. Is that you're gonna have to let him go. You're gonna have to let he cannot be a place where he's constantly under your care. You're gonna have to put him in God's hands, and
Mm,
that's a dangerous, it's a scary thing for
absolutely.
us to not have control, because if you still got this addicted guy on your couch, you feel like you can still help and you can still, but man, some of those times of letting go is allowing God to really get through. And
Mm,
that was me, man. The homeless things and the jail time and facing the consequences for my actions and stuff, and sheltering people from their consequences is only is only just holding back the miracle. You're
mm,
slowing God's process,
mm,
and sometimes people just don't make it through. They just don't. They you can die on your mama's couch.
mm.
You can die on your mama's couch, and then your mama's going to feel, the regret of all that. I mean, we all make choices, and we all have to face the consequences. But it's an opportunity. Those dark times are an opportunity for God to use, for Him to show who you really are and who He is.
Mm. Yeah.
And
So it takes a tremendous amount of faith for a mama to say, you're not sleeping on my couch anymore.
right.
And basically to turn you over. The Bible speaks, Paul basically talks about, some unbelievers and turning them over. I can't quote the scripture, but, turning them over to the devil, so to speak. And, you have to trust God that He is going to do what He's going to do in their life. And that is an extremely difficult situation when it's your children involved. But
Yeah.
I mean, we just heard it from you. I mean, firsthand experience. Somebody who's being enabled can't get to the end of themselves to get rescued.
Yeah, you're just delaying their healing by not letting them face their problem. And when you're always giving somebody an easy way out, they're always going to keep doing the same things they're doing. They're just. I've got friends that are having to deal with some consequences. Through the courts, they've been, and it's a good wake up opportunity for them to have to face it. And I'm like, always tell the truth. Tell the truth.
Right.
Don't go in there and spout off like, well, I was diabetic and I had an altered, my medications were off and stuff.
Right.
No, take responsibility for your actions. Tell the truth and face those consequences. Those consequences are tough to go through, but they're great learning lessons, and they keep you square. And the beautiful thing about, I talk so passionately about my past because I don't want to go back there. I keep that door always cracked open. And I've had Christians tell me, "Oh, you're delivered now. You're not an alcoholic anymore. Don't say, man, you're free." And that is so true. But there's enough Dennis in here to screw the whole thing up.
Right. That point right there, Dennis. Now, what you just said, that's not just true of Dennis Parker, who's been an alcoholic and been destitute and homeless. There's enough Scotty and me who's never walked down that road to jump the tracks tomorrow, right? Just because I've never been there yet doesn't mean that if I get on my high horse and think that I'm all that I can't get off the track and go down the same road.
Absolutely.
And I mean, I have talked to people who have done that, and they've been in church and they've never made those mistakes until they get to be 40 or 50 years old, and then they realize, oh, I'm on top of the world. I must not need all that now. They lose connection with that person in their life who can rein them back in, and before you know it, they're in the ditch when they never would have thought it, right? So, anybody can go back there, and that's just a message and a warning to anybody who begins to think that way and who loses touch. Again, I keep repeating myself here, but having somebody in your life that you trust, that who will speak truth into your life and say, hey, hang on a minute, you're getting off the tracks here a little bit.
Well, and there's verses in Proverbs. I'm sure it's said many times because it's a valuable piece of information. But anybody that doesn't accept correction is a fool. They're a fool. And I was a fool for years. Now, I've in these days in being in Christ, and somehow the beauty in coming to Christ and having this guiding of the Holy Spirit, but having also this flesh of me that still wants what Dennis wants from time to time, the more Jesus and more of His Word that I can get into my heart and into my mind, the less I'm going to be turning away from Him. But I have the luxury in this faith in a body of Christ to call a buddy of mine and air out some absolute nonsense that's going through my mind and tell him, say, you know what, I'm going to do this. And him say, you know what, Dennis, that's the goofiest thing I've ever heard in my life. Don't you dare do that. And then listen to him, and at the same time, not the worst thing, but the best thing is them to quote scripture at you. Ben Clark does this to me all the time. He'll it's not what Ben says, but it's what Jesus said. Now
Right.
then you're like, I still don't like it. I don't like it. I don't like what Jesus said. And I want to do, I'm just like this little kid having a tantrum. But when I get alone,
Right.
and I get with God, I realize that I am that kid having a tantrum, and I need to calm down, and I need to not do many times what I want to do. And the denying of oneself is where true happiness is. And that, my friend, makes no sense.
Yeah, that's that for the human mind. I mean, I've told people many times, walking the Christian life is opposite to what our human nature thinks about doing something, right? I mean, read the Beatitudes, and see what it says about, the poor in spirit and all those kind of things. It's not what we want to do. It's against our natural tendency, and we have to rein that in. We have to crucify our flesh daily to truly live that out, and it hurts. I mean, it hurts to do it. We don't like that. We don't like the correction. Sometimes we don't like to hear the word of God when it's not what we personally want to do.
In
but
the
it's
way
good.
I want to hear it, the genre and the songs. I want to be entertained. I think for the most part, many times my disdain for the church many times is because I don't feel like I'm getting what I want because I'm not being entertained. I'm not hearing the songs that I want to hear. I'm not hearing the voice that I want to hear it out of. I'm not hearing the eloquent. I am so critical of everything because I'm treating it as entertainment. It's so ridiculous how you're caught in your flesh so much that I'm just feeding this monkey still. And the only thing is rest. Come into my rest is what Jesus said. Come into my rest. He said, it is finished. He sat down. He's resting.
Right.
It's done. I everything I could do, I did, and it's good.
Right.
And that's the good news in the gospel. But I mean, we're still. I'm in no way saying anybody shouldn't have a nice house. If God blesses you with a nice house, live in that thing. But I tell you, there's a house that I built about 14 years ago, and I pass by it every day or every so often when I go to my dad's old place. It's right next door, and it's a big old place. It's beautiful, and I live in a dump. I mean, it's not a dump. It's clean, but it's 2 rooms. I got out of jail. I didn't know where I was going to live. Had no idea. My friend in AA, the same guy I told you about that I met in AA, he looked at me one day because I was worried. I don't know where I'm going to live. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't have a job. I don't know what I'm going to do. And he just looked at me, and he doesn't even remember saying it. But it's the most spiritual thing he could ever say. He said, Dennis, who's this God you say you trust? And it shut me up. And I say, man, I came out of jail with massive anxiety because I felt like I was going to go into a halfway house. That was my plan. And I went to go to this halfway house and had a panic attack. It's like, if I go to this place, I'm going to drink again. I can't be here. God weaved people into my life that took me into their house for a couple days, that guided me around, found this place that I'm still at. I came to this place, met my landlord who took a chance on an alcoholic that had 5 DUIs, that couldn't drive. I didn't have a license. I couldn't go anywhere. I was washing dishes at a Thai restaurant up the street. Why would you rent to a guy like that who just come freshly out of jail? No. He told me on the phone, this is how God works. He said, when I talked to you on the phone, I didn't get your references or nothing. I knew I was going to rent to you.
Hmm.
God protected me. He allowed me to keep the job that I had on work release. He allowed me to keep that gig right there, washing dishes 4 nights a week
Hmm.
for 9 months. And I rode a bicycle back and forth every morning to meetings, and I'd go work, and I'd come back here to this little place, and I had a Himalayan salt lamp that I thought was the Holy Spirit. You know, it was ridiculous. I was so delusional in my faith, man. I even called my friend Ben up. I said, "Man, I got such peace in this place." It's you know, and I'm attributed to my Himalayan salt lamp. And I'm like, you know, because I read this little pamphlet that said, "Man, it cleans the air. It brings comfort. It brings peace." I was like, everything that I'm feeling right here
Right.
is because, and I could have been a Himalayan salt lamp. You know, I could have been a dealer. And I called Ben up one day and I said, "Hey," he said, "Man, have you got a Himalayan salt lamp?" He said, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "Man, it's got this nice orange glow. It brings peace." And he said, "Shut up, Dennis. That's Jesus." But that's what I want to tell you. I want to tell but that's the truth. That's
Right.
how delusional I was
Right.
in being a new Christian. Is I was giving the credit of the peace of God
Hmm.
to a Himalayan salt lamp.
Hmm.
At the same time, God never withheld his blessings from me. He never withheld his presence from me.
Hmm.
He never stopped blessing me. I was one of his children. I was just disillusioned. I just didn't know. And somehow he led me to people that gave me the truth, told me the truth, where to find it in his word. And
Hmm.
somehow I just inched on. And that's where I think a lot of people in their faith, they just don't latch on.
Right. Right. Well, and everybody needs that. Everybody needs that person, just like the people you had to kind of guide them and steer them. So let's move the story. Can't talk, Dennis. Let's move the story forward a little bit. So you got out of jail. God's done a miraculous work through the program there. He's got you in a place,
Yes.
and somehow you get back playing music again.
Yes.
And tell us a little bit. Tell us a little bit about how that happened.
Well, I was still playing music with Cindy. I was working doing the dishwashing thing at the Thai restaurant,
Uh-huh.
and we were playing little gigs. She was booking gigs and little duo stuff that we were doing, and it was a real blessing. But one day I was coming out of an AA meeting. I got on my bicycle, and I was headed back to the house. Well, actually, I was headed to Walmart because I walked around Walmart a little bit, and then I'd go home. But I got a text message from Skaggs.
Mm.
He had the same number. And somehow, you know, in a few months before that, which it's a long drawn out, but I had called him
Mm-hmm.
because I wanted him to know that God had done. Wasn't asking for a job. They were playing in Coleman, and I couldn't get there, but I wanted to somehow see him because I wanted to tell him what God had done in my life.
Right.
And that's how he had my number. I don't know. He must have saved it in his
Mm-hmm.
phone
Yeah.
because he called me or he texted me. He said, "What are you doing? I need you to come back for a little bit, for the rest of the year. If you're not doing anything, if you can." He had no idea I was an alcoholic. He had no idea of the trouble that I'd been in. Because a lot of people pat him on the back and say, "Man, thank you for saving Dennis." He didn't have any idea. This
Right.
was all
Right.
God.
Right.
Every bit of it was God. I mean, the timing of it was perfect. I had been 9 months sober. I actually thought about not going because I told everybody I'm not going back on the road. I was happy as a lark. You just can't believe how happy I was washing dishes. I was getting sober, hanging out with these guys they were brilliant to me, teaching me how to be sober and love everybody and helping others. It was the best life I've ever had. And I thought, I'm never going to go back on the road. This is it.
Right.
God will make you out to be the biggest liar. Just say you're not going to do something. Just say you're not going to do something. And God will make you a liar. You know, he'll tell
Right.
you. And so no, I went to my sponsor, Keith. I said, Miss, I don't think I'm going to, I don't know if I can do this. And he said, of course you're going to do this. Of course you're going out there. Of course. This is what God has done for you. God's given you a gift. Do you think he wants you washing dishes for the rest of your life? This was just a period for you to get sober.
Right.
You know, but your place is out there. And so I went and I have, it was the first time in my life. It was the first time in my life out in music that I ever felt that I was exactly where God wanted me to be. Can you imagine that? A man his whole life that felt like I was just trying to find a place to fit in, or trying to find a place to evolve, or this is it. And, you know, and thinking, man, guys, it's got to be out there somewhere. And then be out there with Ricky. I remember the first day is like, I know I'm supposed to be here. I'm in the absolute center of God's will right here. And how much does God love me? He, you know, the beautiful thing, man, he don't love me anymore and he loves you.
Right.
And I didn't have to clean up for him to love me.
That's right. He
He
never stopped.
loved me
Never
when
stopped.
I was filthy. When I wasn't trying, he loved me just as much as when I've been trying.
Right.
It's been an absolute mystery. I'm in awe of the love of God. It's very simple, you know, to say that God loves you.
Right.
But when you really find out and you know it, and God turns on that light bulb and you see it, then you sit there and say, "And I don't deserve it. I don't deserve it. I know I don't."
Right.
You know, the beautiful thing about God is how he has all the justice, but the beauty in God is his restraint in justice. He had every bit of the opportunity to take me out, and he didn't do it.
Right.
And somehow he can use whatever good that he instills in me, and he can also use the sin. There is nothing that he can't use of me that he can't use for his glory. He knows it all.
Right. Yeah. There's no need to hide anything from him, because he knows it all and he's got a purpose. So when you're out with Ricky, I know that you have said that you feel like you're doing ministry when you're out there with Ricky. Probably if somebody just thinks, well, you know, bluegrass group on the road, professional musician, that's not necessarily what comes to mind. They tend to think you got to be in gospel music specifically. I know you play some gospel songs when you're on the road. I'm sure you play some other just bluegrass standards and stuff. Don't know what all Ricky has in a set, but why do you feel like that's ministry for you?
Well, there's a large part of Dennis's flesh that still gets involved in this, is because the same feelings I had back in 95, 96 of I can do more than this. I should be, because I play arch top guitar. It's the most ridiculous thing on the planet for a guy to play arch top in a bluegrass band. Have you ever seen another bluegrass band with an arch top player? No. You know, it's like I've told Ricky, and this is the big joke. I joke about it. It's like I'm trying to find an opportunity to get fired. I told him one day, I said, man, just let me go home. You know, you could find a monkey to do what I'm doing, you know, and they would probably sing better. They would probably be on pitch. But you know, he's like there's this thing in my mind that's like, this job is created for me,
Right.
I don't need to be here. And one of the things that I found is my friend Dewey Boyd that helped produce my record, and that I work with it. He also works with Ricky. I remember the
I want
mo-
to talk about that record in a minute, but
yeah, but
finish your thing,
but
thought on
the
Ricky there.
moments that I've had with him, and this is like moments of ridiculing myself, and I love self-deprecation. I love to make fun of myself, you know. But it's the trying to get fired and the ridiculousness of where I am, and I'm like, I'm not needed. I don't need to be here. All that kind of thing. I remember having breakfast with Dewey. He said, Dennis, if you're here for no other reason, you're here for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it shut me up. It shut me up. I think that what happens is God, one thing that Ricky told me early on when we were, when I got hired was he said, Dennis, the music, we got the music, you know, God's gifted us with the ability to play. He says, but we're out here for God's glory and to point people to Jesus. That's really what it's all about. There's a ministry in that. He says, you know, the other stuff is to draw the people in. They want to see the fast picking. They want to watch Jake wear it out on guitar. They want to see Ricky wear it out and hear the songs that they're familiar with. But they also have an opportunity to be exposed to the gospel, and that is worth more than anything. That's real purpose.
Right.
And you know, and I've found that my place within Kentucky Thunder is not necessarily musically, as though I add as much as I possibly can, which I think is very little, but I try to be an encouragement, and I'm trying to be a mentor to some of these young kids and point them in a direction of faith where I was out on the road faithless, you know, because you can go down in this industry, music industry. It's a real cruel thing, and it's competitive, and you can get on that hamster wheel and just you'll wear yourself out, and you'll get nowhere.
So that's people need to hear that. People need to know that, and so I want to talk about your record.
Yeah.
Okay, because Hannah actually had introduced me to the record because she found out about it through Ben.
Oh yeah.
And you know, I listened to it and I loved it. It drew me in, and then we had the opportunity to hear you there in person. And that day, when I got home, I don't think I did it there. Anyway, somewhere or another, I bought 5 of your albums. And
oh, God love you. I owe you money.
well, the reason I did is because I knew some people that needed to hear the message, right? So for those that might be listening to the podcast that are not familiar with the record, you've got several songs that you sing on there, and then in between the songs, you kind of tell your story and what God's done in your life. Yeah. And so for people that are struggling, right? I just felt like I knew some people that were struggling, and I said, you know, they need to hear this, right? And so I just simply called them and passed them on to those people and asked them to give a listen to it. And you know, I haven't heard anything back from it, but I'm praying that at some point in time it impacts them. Why did you feel the need to do that, and how did you come up with the idea of the format that y'all used on the record there?
I can't take any credit for it. The only thing I knew to do is I had started this right here, Songs Under the Air Conditioning Unit. When I first started, even before I went out with Ricky, I sat here on this couch. Well, we're not on this couch because that couch was filthy. I got it out of here. But I sat on that couch, and I sat right here in front of me, this table, and I had this iPad, and I had it flipped around where I could see myself, and I saw me, my guitar, because I had this music that I didn't want to forget it. And I saw me, myself in that air conditioner. I'm like, it just hit me. I'm going to sing some songs, and I'm going to put it on Facebook. And what it ended up becoming is an opportunity for me to share my faith. God was working in my life. I was getting sober. I mean, I was early sobriety. So I was like really learning stuff, and it was in some unlikely places. Country music, where some of the old songs of my youth were coming back to me. Some of the songs I sung with Joe Diffie, all these things were impacting my life, real life, and God was impacting me life. And I was sharing my story on Facebook through all these different videos and stuff. And so I just had this idea. I had these songs, and I had like 13 or 14 songs, and I had my friend Dewey come over here. He put a couple mics here. We recorded the project here under my air conditioner.
Oh, wow.
And we did the whole thing in a day and a half. Just it was full of mistakes. It's just a run through. I just sang the song, went down, little to no fixing. It is what it is. And so I had all these songs that and had a mix and everything, and I'm like, I'm sitting here nightly listening to him, and I'm like, this makes absolutely no sense. Why is this? Why am I doing? Why did I feel the need to do that? I knew I was supposed to do something. And so I went to Ben Clark. I handed it to him, and I said, this makes no sense, but I think I was supposed to do this. And we went from the very beginning all the way to the very end. He listened to every one of them. We prayed about it, prayed for God's direction. And he after we listened to it, he looked over at me and he said, this is really good, Dennis. He said, but why'd you do this song? Why in the world would you sing Paradise? Why would you do, why would you do any of these songs? And I'm like, and I told him each story, each song. And he's like, well, Dennis, this is your story. He said, why in the world why wouldn't you just tell your story? He said, I see it like this is an opportunity to share the gospel. Right. So you tell it from the very beginning and weave it all the way to the very end and incorporate all the songs. He said, what you do on Facebook anyway? I mean, you're all
just do what you've been doing, Dennis. Just put it on the CD.
Never crossed my mind. Never, ever crossed my mind to talk on a project. Right. And I got resistance from everybody. I got resistance from Dewey. Dewey told me, he says, it ain't gonna work. The Grant, the guy I work with out on the road, I told him about it. He said, you're gonna ruin that thing. You're gonna ruin that whole thing. And I'm like, I think I'm right. That's what I'm supposed to do. And when I went in, Ben invited me over to his cabin and put a mic in front of me. And we had some outlines of stuff through, but it was basically, he had bullet points. He would say, talk about this, talk about this, talk about this. And I would just kind of look so I wouldn't get, I'm already chasing rabbits. I've been chasing rabbits all afternoon with this thing. So he would kind of keep me focused in and we ended up putting all this stuff together. And I've seen the work of God. I've seen the hand of God in the project. I've seen it from the very beginning to just the nonsense of me and how he clearly you can be able to share your life and share the gospel with other people. And I talk about things on that record that I experienced, but I didn't understand. Right. And within the last 2 years of digging into that Bible, I'm starting to understand the things that I talked about on that record. How does that happen? That's the amazing Holy Spirit, So
somebody wants to get the record, okay? Yeah. And they need to get the record. They need to get the record and listen to it. Where do they go to get it?
BanjoBenClark.com. You can get it straight from him, or you can Facebook Messenger me, Dennis W. Parker, and I'll get it to you. And I'm really sincere about this. If you don't have the money for it, but you feel like you need it, and you have somebody that you need to get it to, don't let money keep you from getting it. And it's also available on Spotify. It's available on Amazon. You can get it via. Well, you can get the digital formats on Amazon and Apple, right, and iTunes and stuff. But if you want an actual physical copy of it, you can get it through Banjo Pen Clark, or you can get it from me. I would suggest you get it to Banjo Pen Clark because he might make $1 or something off of it.
There you go. There you
That
go. We
would
got
be
to keep Banjo being calm.
invest in the Banjo Clark kingdom.
And I hope Ben's listening to this, so Ben will
I
give.
hope he is too. I tell you, man, there's no finer of a brother that I've ever had in my life than that man right there.
Right.
Yeah.
Good.
If I could just interject something about the album too, I just wanted to say, of course, the message is very powerful, but also from the musical side, it's just beautiful. And I'm a singer, and we're kind of a musical family, and just the honesty in your voice adds something you can't even really describe to the music, and you play the guitar with such sensitivity, and so it's got the message, but it's also just beautiful to listen to. And I don't think we ever said what it's called. It's called
Songs Under the Air Conditioning Unit.
So I'll go check it out.
I play regularly down here at the rescue mission on Fridays. They have a service here, and I went there this morning, and one of the guys, one of the pastors there, one of the leaders there, came up to me and he said, I love the way you play your guitar and sing. And I'm like, and it just really dawned on me this morning, man, I struggled with my instrument for the majority of my life. God gave me a gift of being able to be able to play, but not feeling really comfortable in it. Not feeling free to be able to, just relax and play. I've always felt like just like tied up in a knot until I played it enough where it just became muscle memory, and I was just going through the motions, which most of my career has been going through the motions. But one thing I have found, and this happened in faith, is somehow God released me. I found real freedom. I found freedom to be able to sing. I found out who I was singing about. I actually have a relationship with the guy. If you feel something, it's because I believe it. And it's not because of Dennis. It's because God allowed me to believe it. Everything that I have is because God gave it to me. It's nothing that I can do, or it's nothing, no works about it. I can't improve upon. I can try, but there's a freedom that I've found in Jesus, even musically, that has come out. That is, it is honesty. I'm trying to be as transparent as I possibly can, without scaring you to death.
You can tell when you listen that it's anointed, as they say.
Well,
yeah, and just trying to be an encouragement to you, Dennis, specifically, and just to encourage people to go get it and listen to it if they haven't. But we just went by Easter, and my wife was, the song "He's Alive," big Easter song, and she started naming off these people that sing that song, and she named off 5 or 6, but she said, my favorite one is Dennis Parker.
Yeah.
And the reason is because when Dennis Parker sings that song, you're singing it from a place of honesty and experience, and the song comes alive. Jesus is alive, but the song comes alive.
It's so meaningful because the majority of my life I tried to prove that God was dead and that Jesus was dead, and that's why I really wanted to include that in that project. But there's a clip somewhere. You have to really dig to find it. But I played at this church, Locust Grove, and it was the first Easter that I was free, and it was about 3 months out of jail, and I got to play that song at church. And I still get, just to even think about it just kind of tears me up. But I got to the end, and I threw my hands out, and I started stomping. You could hear me stomping, on this hard floor. And I'm about to have a Pentecostal fit. It was so real to me, man. I felt so free, man. You're just coming out of bondage, coming out of jail, and then you realize Jesus is alive. My goodness, I mean, we were dead in our trespasses and our sin. And man, the fact that he came out of the grave is a reason for Easter in my life, man. I was in bondage. I was in literal bondage over here in Huntsville, Alabama. And I was a free man. Man, who would have ever imagined that knowing that and accepting that would make me so blasted happy? It amazes me. You know, my whole life I tried to find joy and happiness. Son, I'm happier than a pig in slop.
I'm gonna tell you that if that story there doesn't encourage you and make you smile, I don't know what would. But I gotta ask this question, Dennis, because obviously, I mean, the answer seems obvious, right? We've talked about your passion for Christ and you living it out and being transparent when you sing. Why do you think that everybody's not like that? Why are there so many Christians that just don't really seem to be very passionate about Christ?
What's that? There's a portion in the Gospels that talks about, you know, the one that owed the most of debt is the most thankful, you know, right, to have his debt paid.
Yep.
I think that's part of it. I think a large majority of people think they're okay. You know, they look at their own life and they can manage everything okay, and they think they're all right and they don't need Jesus. You know, they function their business and they go to work and they do whatever they do, and they have very little relationship. They don't find a need to really have to dig in to get through life. They're just fine. They got toes in the sand at the beach. Everything's all right. You know, it's you know, and partly I really have I talk about Jesus all the time. I mean, it's part, if I don't care, I don't have a relationship in my life that somehow I don't end up talking about Jesus in some aspect. It just flows out of me. And the one thing that I have learned is going up to the mission, and you have a lot of broken people that don't have a place to live, and I thought this was so wonderful. This is a big message, is they say, stop trying to quit. You can't do it. Pursue Christ. If every one of us, and if you are a believer, pursue Christ, your life will change, and your language will change. Your story will be evident, and you will tell people all the time about what you're learning, because it's wisdom and it's unbelievable knowledge that flows straight from heaven, man. This stuff is infectious. It's radical. I mean, I never wanted to be this guy. I fought against it, you know. It's like, man, I've seen these guys that come to Jesus and they get all hyped up and talk about Jesus all the time. It's like, man, it's sickening. I don't want to be that way. I want to be approachable. I want, you know, and I'm not talking about, man, you know, there's times that, man, you have to curb it back a little bit. This right here can scare some people. You know, I could do a disservice to Jesus by being this all the time. And you got to be careful about the platform, and you let all this out. It's all out right now. I mean, it's in full glow. But man, I tell you, brother, I just think it's normal. If Jesus is a part of your life, you're going to share it. There is no thing that I have to plan it, and I have to do this study, and I have to do this program, and then I have to incorporate this. If you're thinking that much about it, you might need to be getting on your knees and reevaluating some things. And that's one thing that I really think Christians need to do, is reevaluate your salvation. Just make sure you know who you know who you know. Make sure, because I'm telling you, the most dangerous and most scary part of Scripture that I've ever read is where you got folks in the day that say, man, I did this. I prophesied in your name. I did this for you. And and he says, get away from me.
Yeah.
I
Depart from me, you workers of iniquity. I never knew you. That's so scary. So
and see and the thing about it is, I've thought about this many times when it comes to once saved, always saved and salvation, because there's so many scriptures that makes me lean towards, man, can you lose it? Can you lose it? I don't think you can lose it. You can't lose it, but because what God did is eternal. He does the full work, and in that scripture, he doesn't say, well, I knew you back in January of 2020, but then you walked away. He doesn't say that. He says, I never knew you.
Right.
If he knows you, he knows you.
He doesn't forget, does he? He doesn't forget if he knew you.
You are in the fold, my friend.
Right.
But I just encourage you to make sure that you need to know that you're in the faith. And the product of you knowing is your fruit.
Absolutely.
That's how you'll know is the fruit.
Right. That's
so
good.
Go out and produce some fruit. Build you some trees or something. Get some trees put in the ground. Go get outside yourself. And you really want to help yourself and you want to help the kingdom. Go help somebody else. Tell them about Jesus.
Right. Good words. Very good words.
Yes, sir.
Well, Dennis, we've been going for a while. I don't want to wear you out, and it's been tremendous talking to you. I mean, man, I hope people will listen to this. I don't know how somebody could listen to this and not be encouraged, right? And not have a desire to draw closer to God, to know Jesus more, to get in that Bible and search the scriptures, to see if what we're saying is true, to see if what you're saying is true, to find Jesus for themselves. I mean, people should be spurred to do that. Is there any other thing you'd like to relay while we got as we're closing out here? Something we hadn't talked about.
All I'll tell you is the more I dig, the more I'm in awe. And there's this study that I've been going through recently, and it's what I'm responsible for is to know God as much as I possibly can. Mm-hmm. And I'm really a big R.C. Sproul fan.
Yeah.
And I love the way he can explain these things. But one of the things that I've taken away from some of these studies is the more I know God, the more I can know his ways and know who he is. Because God is a God of wrath. He's the same God in the Old Testament he is in the New Testament. Same God. It's not two different gods that a lot of people are trying to make him out to be. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And that same God has many beautiful attributes. And one of them is his holiness.
Right.
And his holiness is that sin cannot be in his presence. And so away from God, you're lost. I don't care how you may be a good person. Probably, I picked up a stray dog last week. I'm a good person. I'm gonna tell you that right there ain't gonna get you into heaven.
All right.
We all have sinned and we all fall short. And my problem today is that it's so easy to compare ourselves with somebody else and make ourselves better. Right. Don't compare yourself to other people. Compare yourself to the sinless Lamb of God. And that sinless Lamb of God was nailed to a cross for you and for me. And that's the only way we can have. And I am hidden in Christ. I'm in that hidden place of his righteousness. Man, God sees me through his son. That's awesome. And it's completely freeing. You can start a life there.
Absolutely.
But the more you dig into that Bible, the more it'll put you in awe because all the pieces fit together. Right. Regardless of what people these days are trying to tell you. Yeah. It all fits together.
Well, very good. Dennis, again, we appreciate you joining. And I hope we can get together in person sometime and just talk about this some more and fellowship together some. But it's been very good. For those of you who are listening to the podcast today, if you've enjoyed what you heard, just please subscribe to the podcast. Give us a 5-star review. Tell somebody else about it. Tell them to come listen to Dennis's story and listen to the other podcasts that we've got going on. You can find us anywhere the podcasts are, Apple Podcasts, all those different places. We're out there. So we appreciate the audience joining us today, and y'all have a good day, and we'll talk to you soon.